All right, I have with me this time writer, Russia specialist Mark Hackard. He's written for Talkies Mag. He's written for Alternative Right. And we're going to talk about a bunch of the articles that he's written. A lot of them I've read over the years and didn't really make a connection with who the guy was. I have, read all kinds of sites, but his articles are very similar in ways to the stuff that I write. So if you like the stuff on Jay's analysis, you'll like his stuff. But Mark, tell us about you first. Where are you from? What's your background? What got you into what I guess we might call right-wing writings, or something that's more, I guess we might call underground stuff that most people aren't aware of. Tell us about yourself.
Sure, Jay. Thanks. I grew up in California, in Northern California, and I was brought up in a Catholic family, and it was, was blessed with a great childhood. My parents brought me up in, great family, and, was raised in the faith. I went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic high school. I went to Georgetown for my my undergrad. I got my my master's degree at Stanford in Russian studies, and ultimately I would convert to Orthodox Christianity in 2012, at the beginning of 2012 on Orthodox Christmas.
Oh, okay.
That was kind of a seminal event, and I'm very thankful that my mom and my dad especially in this regard, but that he brought me up with strong faith, and he remains a strong Catholic, but I felt that Orthodoxy was kind of fulfillment, and Orthodoxy, I think I was led to Orthodoxy in part because of what I read, a lot of Russian philosophers and conservative thinkers.
Yeah.
They have a very strong tradition in that regard. I'd always kind of been critical of the left, and, I always had conservative instincts. And I knew, you can look at the actions of the left in liberalism or socialism, and they always, they always seem to be about, undermining nature and order.
Right.
I think it took me a while to shift away, though, from, kind of mainstream conservatism. With, in college, I was still, reading National Review and thinking, this is really good stuff. I had to get out of that box. And I did, I'd say around probably 2007 or so, 2006, 2007, I was already beginning to reject aspects of, what would be called mainstream conservatism or
right.
white liberalism, because I began to realize, the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Well, tell me what initially sort of triggered that. Is there one thing, or was it a slow process? Did you read something, watch it? What got you thinking, well, maybe this is a fake right wing?
Yeah, I think that one thing was the issue of the Islamization of the West and the entry of the mass immigration of Muslim populations into the West.
Right.
And publications like National Review, or people like, Mark Stein or whoever would always talk about, there's a Muslim threat and this and that. But they would never do anything. They would never, there would be no proactive measures or preventive measures, to deal with any kind of real threat. And, and I'm not even speaking about Muslim people in a bad way. Rather, just that their culture is different, and when you invite, some group of people country in mass numbers, well, you're risking demographic displacement. And when you have a history of mutual antagonism, as you do between, Christendom and Islam, what used to be Christendom, and today is the secular West. When you have the history of antagonism, it's just a recipe for disaster. So it's not even a matter. We can respect, Muslims as people, and there's plenty. There's a lot of good people out there who are Muslims, but rather it's a matter of recognizing, religious, ethnic, demographic realities for what they are, and saying,
Right. Well, yeah, I agree. I think that aspect of it that demonstrates the sort of weird logic of what we might call, I guess, mainstream progressivism or the left, in that on the one hand, it's a total cultural relativism where there's no difference, but on the other hand, that leads them to a bizarre position when it comes to the question of another faith or another culture that's completely opposed to relativism and liberalism in terms of their social theory. So, classical Islam is not relativistic. It's not that way. So the idea of sociological and moral relativism, cultural relativism, is just so completely impossible and absurd that I know you know this, but something like Islam is a great example of how incompatible that worldview is with reality.
You bet. Yeah, it really shows, just how, the depths to which, secularism has sunk, and really, and the problem is that the mainstream right provides nothing constructive in the way of solving any of these problems. They're essentially, what they've been doing is, under the Bush administration, and now cheering on under the Obama administration, is basically, invade the world, invite the world. You go out, you terrorize Muslim countries, you invade them, and you also, cause enormous damage to Christian communities in the Middle East, and to the point of wiping them out. That's what's happened. That is a consequence of U.S. policy, and we can talk later about whether that's intentional or not. There's some,
right. That is a good question.
Hint that it is.
Right.
This is an anti-Christian policy, but when you send drones out, over the Afghan, Pakistan theater, and terrorize Pashtun villages, and then you invite these people into the United States, and you wonder why they'll hold a grudge. I mean, it's just insane,
Well, that's
clearly, there's.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, there's clearly cultural incompatibilities as well. See it all the time, Stockholm was burning a couple of weeks ago. There were mass riots there.
Right.
Entire neighborhoods or no-go zones. From Paris to Malmo in Sweden and so on. It's really nutty. And when the West is, essentially it's lost its faith, and it's so from there everything just dissolves.
Yeah.
It's brought this on itself.
Now, was there something that before we move into that political stuff, I'm curious, was there something that you read that got you looking at orthodoxy? Because for me, I had a long trek where I read a lot of the church fathers, and that sort of got me out of Protestantism. What about you?
Yeah, I would say, really kind of getting introduced to orthodoxy. Seraphim Rose was a big influence for me. Father Seraphim Rose, he was an American who was born in Southern California in 1934, and he was a brilliant guy, and he would, he was searching for truth his entire life. And
he had a period of Eastern religious interest for a while before he converted.
He studied Eastern religions and philosophies. He studied Zen. He studied, Taoism and Hinduism. He really, he was, he had been into Nietzsche, but he also started studying René Guénon, who was a French metaphysician, and, a great, traditionalist thinker.
Right.
And Guénon, who was actually, Guénon died in 51, and he had become a Sufi in Egypt.
Right.
But Seraphim Rose, read a lot of Guénon, and when he went into an Orthodox church one time in San Francisco, he felt Seraphim Rose. He felt immediately. His name was originally Eugene Rose, and anyway, Father Seraphim Rose felt immediately at home, and from there he began his journey into Orthodoxy. He wrote an amazing work called Nihilism, which I recommend highly. It's kind of a primer on the modern world.
Right.
I would say that's probably his work probably really got me more into really finding out about Orthodoxy. Although I always had kind of an affinity because of my my passion for Russian studies.
Right.
For Russian, I've read a lot of Russian. Everyone from Nikolai Gurdjieff to Dostoevsky, and when you really realize just how very Orthodox and Christian of an author Dostoevsky is when you really you see that come through when you have that background. So
I bet. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of a lot of Russian writers, especially Dostoevsky.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no. I was just going to say, and it's too bad because there's a lot of stuff that should get translated.
I bet. Right.
I'd like to do some more of that. There's a really strong Russian conservative tradition, or what you might want to call, counter-revolutionary. You got Dostoevsky, of course. You also have people like he was originally an anarchist ideologue turned. He was underground hiding in Western Europe, and he turned monarchist, Orthodox monarchist. His name was Lev Tikhonidov. You have people like Konstantin Pobedonosiv, just a lot of great thinkers who really articulated really sharp, excellent critiques of modernity and democracy and liberalism, and really, kind of asserted, the traditional authority of the church, of monarchy, that organic integrity of traditional society.
There's a really funny post on my blog. It's old. It's a couple years old, but I had to put the whole thing up because it's really funny. I actually use René Guénon's Islamic name as my own name, and I'm trolling actually a bunch of other people, who, especially many of whom are liberals. And it was actually on a friend's liberal blog, and so I'm actually playing the character of a Sufi polygamist, and what's funny about it is that it actually illustrates the incompatibility of a completely different worldview with mainline American liberalism, because I'm basically telling a lot of course, many of them are women, and I'm sitting there telling them, well, yeah, I'm going to come, and I'm actually going to have a lot of wives, and we're looking forward to America. It's so liberal, we can. And of course, they're all, about, women's rights and feminism. You can't do that here. I was like, well, you're a relativist. Why can't I do that there?
Yeah, no, why not? Yeah, they have nothing higher than their own desires. That's all they got. So, inevitably, it's going to lead to, someone else imposing their will on them. That's all it is. Yeah, it is.
And once you get to the point where you've, because I was raised Baptist and by a neocon family, and so, but once you've gotten to the point where you've sort of gone into that level of material when you've read, Guénon, you've read Spangler, you've read Yaki, or any of these right-wing writers, and you talking about the more classical Russian conservative writers. I mean, doesn't it just make the present sort of popcorn, bubblegum politics that we have in America just look so ridiculous?
Oh yeah, no, it looks totally ridiculous. It is. It's like it's like a goofy puppet show.
It is, right?
And it really is, in essence, a puppet show. Run by the oligarchs.
Exactly.
Power. I mean,
so here that leads to the next question. Yeah. Has progressivism become totalitarian? And B, is that connected to the Enlightenment in your analysis?
Yeah, I think it is. I think liberalism or progressivism, is inherently at its roots totalitarian, because it's somewhat more subtle in the long term. It's more long term and flexible than say outright Bolshevism, but it lays claims. It makes a claim on men's souls, to lead them, to apostasy and destruction. That's really where I see it going. It seeks to remake man and the world in this, kind of this perverted image. I mean, you could trace it back further even than the Enlightenment, right? Right back to humanism.
Yeah.
Or even in some cases, not that. I mean, as brilliant as the scholastics were, there's some drawbacks there, and certain, just kind of this primacy of reason, of human reason, trying to fit man and God into this, this little box of, rational constructs.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that really, leads to, when reason is the highest faculty, and that's what liberalism, of course, claims. That we're going to build this world based on reason and equality and liberty. Ultimately, man becomes dehumanized. With that, like there's even a book by the on the Rand Corporation. I think it's called Soldiers of Reason. But, I mean, it mechanizes man.
Exactly.
Universal control system.
Yeah, I think you can. A lot of since my background's in philosophy and my degree's in that, I've read a lot of the medieval scholastics, and you can actually trace the philosophical trend of medieval nominalism up through the Renaissance era humanists and the Reformation era humanists, and what you see there is a connection between, and that's not to say that medieval quote realism, the dialectical opposition to that, had all the answers, but what you see is a trend towards thinking that basically the atomized individual and his thought process is really the summit of all reality, and when you and when you do that, you basically have at least implicitly accepted materialism. So even though maybe Abelard and people in the Middle Ages that were pioneering the idea of nominalism didn't necessarily have all those presuppositions at work, what eventually comes out of that is the British Enlightenment thinkers who do take it, who do take it to their full, the full logical conclusion, which is materialism, wherein everything is just completely disconnected, and you basically have a total breakdown of the whole thought process of what we might call Western civilization.
Right, absolutely. Everything breaks down, and then, it's just this so you have to impose this arbitrary tyranny.
Yes, right.
I'm sure you're familiar with, like Jeremy Bentham,
Right. Yeah, the Panopticon, right? The Panopticon.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I mean, Bentham was, a pioneer of, right ideology, I mean, classic Enlightenment ideology, man is rights. You know, he wasn't a supporter. You know, he wasn't, legal right. You know, but these rights proliferate, and it's funny how, you know, the more rights we seem to have, you know, the greater, this oppressive state.
Absolutely.
Not an organic state.
Well,
but,
yeah.
Kind of this evil-like structure grows.
Exactly. Into a big sort of cancerous blob. I mean, you know, it's like there's a connection between Enlightenment empiricism, which is the direct descendant of, you know, the medieval nominalism, and social contract theory. So when you've gone from nominalism to British empiricism, Enlightenment empiricism, most of them, when they dealt with the question of the state, they said, well, I guess if we're going to have some sort of government, since we don't have any direct empirical evidence of a history of monarchs or successive rulers or whatever, they just sort of sat back in, you know, abstract thinking, thought, well, you know, like Locke's theory of government, right? Well, the only origin of government has to just be a bunch of people that got together in the pure state of nature and said, hey, let's have a government. So the point of all that is just that from that perspective, it also seems to follow, right, that rights, quote unquote, would also therefore be just propositional or enacted out of man's mind, right?
Yeah, and you know, in some sense they are, and they are just these propositions. You know, I mean, you know, as far as, you know, I mean, that's the major sticking point. You know, rights are just they're these constructs. You know, I mean, and really it's just an assertion, essentially, of the will to power.
Right.
And so, it really it just leads to further and further breakdown, and we see it today in society.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue to the next question, because the idea that you mentioned the will to power of the state. You gave us a good criticism of I guess American progressivism in your article, "The Will to React." Tell us about that and what you're getting at there and what the point was.
Sure. Well, yeah, the Will to React. That was an article I did from April of 2012. Now, it was I translated Ivan Ivian. He's a Russian conservative thinker, you know, monarchist. He was a white emigre who had been active in the anti-Bolshevik resistance. But Ivian, he was a great scholar anyway. He wrote a kind of a critique and analysis of fascism.
Mm-hmm.
I think this article was from 1948. And, you know, as an introduction, you know, I kind of, you know, talked about how if you oppose the liberal order today, you know, you're going to be called a nasty fascist,
right?
You know, and which, you know, today means nothing. And but you know, and Ian in his work, you know, he made some excellent criticisms of fascism, and you know, he also talked about, you know, how there you know, among certain movements in Europe, you know, in the interwar period, you know, they really were, you know, intent on resisting the Bolsheviks and liberalism without, you know, just, you know, leading to, you know, without either, you know, worshiping, you know, just this, you know, a psychotic ruler like Hitler or you know, the state, you know, under Mussolini's system, or you know, kind of this biological, you know, kind of the worship of you know, genes,
genetics, right?
Almost zoological racism,
right?
But you know, so what then? So we're trying to figure out, we're trying to draw lessons from that and apply them to today. The environment we face today is that, you know, and you've talked about this in your articles too, but you know, I think I mentioned it. You know, America is kind of like this weird, you know, macabre, pornographic Disneyland.
Yes.
You it imposes itself as the only legitimate system of political economy in the world, and, by any means necessary, through bombardment or sanctions or, cultural subversion.
Cultural war, right.
NGOs, these wars, you name it. That seems, it is marketing itself, of course, as the end of history. And it's just bizarre. And you wrote a really funny article, actually, maybe a month or so ago about, you said that America, and of course, America is a wonderful country. And when I talk about America, I'm talking about the, kind of the political, cultural environment,
right.
that we clash with. But unfortunately, the bad stuff kind of jumps to the forefront. America's full of great and wonderful people, and it really is. It's a land of blessings, and we're lucky to live here. At the same time, we have to confront the negative phenomena as well.
Right.
So, I think you said it in a pretty funny way. That America, as far as as far as its American popular culture and politics, and you could say it's like manifested, as you said, like Chuck E. Cheese on a Harley motorcycle, holding Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law, and Jenna Jameson is on the back
right.
of the motorcycle. They're riding at you at like 80 miles an hour.
Well, here's coming at you to just wreck into you, to wreck everything. But here's an interesting question: is it what we just talked about philosophically? America is the great experiment, and it's an experiment
right.
in the idea of a propositional nation. Now, that might not have been, that wasn't the goal of, say, the original colonists, but by the time of Lincoln and people like that, the idea is that, we can actually just create a nation by coming together and writing out sentences, and therefore we have a nation. When a nation in all history of all cultures is always, or tribe or whatever you want to call it, even empire, it always had some connection to land and the people that populated it.
Of course. No, that's the thing, is that these constructs, and and you can tie this in again with rights ideology, or with the social contract, and so they're just constructs. They're these airy abstractions, and it's the same thing, unfortunately, with the experiment we live under today. Think about it. Like space aliens could fly down, and if they believe, and all men are created equal, and they believe in capitalism, hey, they're American. That's it. They
right.
can land tomorrow on their UFO and take the citizenship test. Right. There's nothing else there. Essentially, it's just about consumers. It's about it really is. You're trying to make a global market system. That's at one level. That is the novus ordo seclorum.
Mm-hmm.
What always is referred to, and what George Bush referred to as the New World Order. So it's look, traditional nations, peoples are always based on, they have several elements to them, but you have faith, you have heritage, culture, and these things matter. These things are in our blood. These are the human things that make us who we are.
Exactly.
That really make us human. And to kind of fit people into these abstract boxes of this Enlightenment ideology. It really does. It takes away aspects of their humanity, and it lessens. It detracts from.
Okay.
The richness of cultures.
Now, I have to ask you this, though, because, in my own experience in higher education and college and grad school, if you went to Georgetown and then you went to Stanford, my experience was a nightmare. I mean, I was just constantly into it with all the professors, and it was just awful. What was your experience? I mean, did you just kind of keep quiet and be cool, or Georgetown is what that's Carol Quigley land. I mean, that's.
Oh yeah, you bet.
So what was that experience like for you?
I loved going to school. That was fun. But I look back on it and I think, well, you're never going to read Julius Evola at Georgetown. You know, sorry, it's not going to happen. But or Rene Guénon, or any of these guys. The people who really matter, their thought really matters. I mean, you're pretty much not. You're not going to come across it. You'll come across. Thank God you'll come across Dostoevsky and Plato, but my experience was overall pretty good. But I would only say things once in a while. I would kind of.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't mix it up too much with the professors. I'd kind of maybe I'd roll my eyes overtly, or I'd I would just say something kind of sharp every once in a while, like
Yeah.
There is no progress in history, and give some dark example of that. but certainly if you were to confront these people, and that they would get they'd get uncomfortable and start trying to justify themselves.
Well,
in front of their adoring audience, of course.
That's something that I often brought up in all my classes, because I had I guess you could say, quote, conspiratorial view of things ever since I was 18, when I first started reading about the New World Order. So my entire college experience, I was thankfully prepared for, I guess, what you might call liberal Marxist indoctrination. Right. So it didn't ever work on me. But one of the things I often tried to bring up in the futile process of trying to reason with these people was that, most of what you're fighting against is actually what funds the very thing that you're a part of. So you talk about the alliance of international capital and cultural Marxism. So I always tried to explain this to the professors, because Anthony Sutton had written about this years ago. So explain what that is. Well, why do you make the claim that because those two things seem incommensurable? Well, I mean, how could Marxism have any connection to international banking? That doesn't make any sense. Those two things are opposed.
Right. Yeah, these, and I'm sure those professors, it's like, have they ever read, Carol Quigley or Anthony Sutton? Have they ever thought about that? You wonder. I mean, people who are supposedly, so brilliant, yet they're being manipulated at some level.
Oh, absolutely. But can you explain that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Why do you think that there is that relationship?
Okay, well, first off, let's start off, capitalism and communism are essentially two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Now, and we of course can say, well, free markets in some general sense is good. You don't want to totally control the economy and so on. Okay, but free market ideology, as it is a total. It's a force of destruction. Let's go back. We talk about, we could posit, or we know the banksters did create communism. Okay, that it was the other half of the dialectic. Okay, so you had capitalism and communism were meant to form a new synthesis of essentially a world state. That was the hope of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
It's been documented. Anthony Sutton actually did a great job. I think it's called Wall Street and the Bolsheviks.
Yep.
He showed how Kuhn and Loeb,
mm-hmm.
These banking houses in New York and London, Brown Brothers, Harriman, who were very, very, at the top level of influence in the political establishment. Okay, these
Sure.
This is the oligarchy, right? These are the people who ran things, in the political arena. These banksters directly financed Bolshevik revolution. Trotsky was, he was in New York. His revolutionaries trained, I think, in Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing. And then you go further, the foundations, like the Rockefeller Foundation,
Right.
Carnegie, and these different, Ford Foundation. They sponsored the Frankfurt School, especially Rockefeller.
Yep.
They sponsored the Frankfurt School of Immigration to the U.S.
Yep.
Mark Hackard to UC San Diego and Harvard and Columbia and so on. You had Adorno.
Yep.
In California as well. You had Horkheimer, University of Chicago, which is a big, Rockefeller haven.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it just makes me think of. I had so many classes in college and in grad school as well that dealt with all of that stuff. In other words, I had a whole class on Marxism and critical theory that dealt with dialectics, and it was basically about the Frankfurt School, and it was in that class that I even brought up the fact that I said, well, hey, doesn't it seem a little strange to anybody in here that people like the Rockefeller Foundation are funding and supporting the social, basically cultural breakdown, and no, nobody found that at all interesting or slightly conspiracy. It was just like, it was just blank stares. But
yeah, just like you're talking at a wall.
Yeah, I'm like, and here we are reading the Dialectic of Enlightenment, and if you've read that book by Horkheimer and Adorno, they're actually. They've actually, at that point, gotten to a kind of pessimistic sort of Nietzschean view. And my professor, who specialized in Marxism, he actually did his dissertation under somebody from the Frankfurt School. So, I always make this joke that, I was being taught directly by Marxistolic succession. I had direct, I'm making a joke on apostolic succession. I had Marxistolic succession from a guy.
It's kind of like the church of the anti-tradition.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so here's this guy, and he's basically, saying, Horkheimer and Adorno are, at this point, pretty pessimistic about, the idea of liberalism and progressivism. So they've kind of turned to a dark, more conspiratorial view because they talk about the culture industry that is essentially international capital has created a culture industry that's actually marketed to basically create standardization, right? So the next movie that comes out is actually just an advertisement for the next movie that comes out.
Oh, yeah.
But ultimately designed to bring about sort of cultural chaos and destruction. It was Adorno that even said that, the goal is to create the disassociation of the individual psyche.
Right, through, and especially with him, through music.
Right.
The gods of finance, brought cultural Bolshevism to America, and the CIA. You can look at them; they funded all kinds of phenomena that were aimed at cultural breakdown. Abstract art.
Mm-hmm.
That was a weapon used against the Soviet Union, believe it or not. In opposition to socialist realism. There's a lot of evidence that the CIA essentially engineered the psychedelic revolution.
No, actually, we've been
and other drugs. Yeah, and then then feminism as well. Gloria Steinem. It's out there. It's open. This is accessible. It's not a secret.
No, right. The Rockefellers' authorized biography has a whole chapter on Abby Rockefeller, basically starting the modern feminist movement with $23 million. So
yeah, and it's transparent, but no one, people don't really pay attention to that, unfortunately. Yeah, it is. It's an agenda of dissolution. Traditional faith, identity, your heritage. You're not supposed to remember any of that stuff. It enables greater oligarch control, and this is. I mean, this has been it's not like it started yesterday or it even started in the '60s. Of course, it was much longer
Sure.
than that. But it all ultimately goes back to the Enlightenment and Revolution.
It does, right?
Era.
So you talk about on the let's look at this in terms of the geopolitical theater. You talk about NATO as the postmodern alliance. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, with NATO expansion, it really is like this. It's kind of like this parlor game where they kind of play postmodern language, with saying that Russia isn't a threat, and then they have trouble, even justifying their existence, and yet they keep expanding. It's this, it's like their only logic is expansion.
Right.
It's like a virus, but it doesn't have an essence in a sense, or at least its essence is not declared.
Except the furtherance of the system itself. I think you made a comment like that.
You're right. It's just self-replicating.
Right.
It does. I mean, it does, and it's postmodern in the other sense. I mean, its real aim is to impose post-modernity on the entire world.
Yeah.
And of course, its real aim is to encircle Russia.
Right.
And ultimately, break it up and control it, dominate Eurasia. So it's an instrument of U.S. power, but it's been without a purpose since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it's been, retooled and tailored, for American interests, to, whether that's, Afghanistan or, supposedly fighting, cyber crime or piracy, all these little things that can be dealt with at lower levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty much what I meant. I mean, I think the last members of NATO to be admitted were, the Croats and the Albanians. And, the Albanians are in there now. Watch out, folks.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Eurasia, what do you think about the idea that this is sort of by design to get Eurasia into its own sort of block as a sort of foil to the West, or do you think that there is a legitimate opposition in Russia?
Well, I would say with Eurasia, it certainly was the design, to get, to form a Eurasian bloc.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at, of course, George Orwell's 1984 reflects that. It was
Right.
part of the design.
Right.
You had, once the Nazi, once Hitler's Germany was destroyed, of course you had the bipolar world, and but we got to remember that throughout the Soviet Union's existence, certainly into the Cold War, it was propped up all along by loans from Western banks.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've written about that several times. Yes.
Yeah. So that was by design. So Eurasia in that case was the foil. But I think Eurasia can be a legitimate counterforce.
Right.
To the Pax Americana. I think there are legitimate parties.
Okay. Right.
Parties, but necessarily. But rather, there are people in Russia, and there are groups who look to kind of form a regional space, a sphere of influence, and preserve Russian culture, Russian civilization, the Russian people, and stand against what is this global imperialism.
Right.
So I think it seems to me that this is, it's not what's happening now is not, at least with Russia, that's not engineered by, the bankers or what you call, internationalist forces or U.S. foreign policy. I mean, with Russia, you see stuff that they try. They certainly, like the National Endowment for Democracy
right.
and,
yeah.
These different NGOs will try, they try to do their little color revolutions, and they've tried it in Russia as well. They've tried it in Belarus. They succeeded for a while in Ukraine, and then that flopped,
Yeah.
So they want to. I mean, Soros has the Open Society Foundation,
Yeah.
which, backs.
Right, and Brzezinski was involved. Right, and Brzezinski was involved in creating some of the other NGOs that are like Chechnya and that. Right.
We could look at destabilization at the regional and ethnic and religious levels, where people like Brzezinski created the American Committee for Peace in the Caucasus.
The Caucasus, right? Yeah.
Yes, they always have these semi-official projects going.
Okay, here's an interesting question. From my research, I would say in the last 100 years, from what I've read, you basically have this sort of Anglo-imperial model, which had all these sort of ideas that Quigley and a bunch of other writers on espionage discuss, and that sort of morphed into, eventually the Royal Society and these different entities were able to bring the U.S. back under its aegis, if you will, to essentially make the U.S. again a sort of client state of this shadow banking, shadow imperial empire that's not really about, it's not really run by politicians and government officials and bureaucrats. Those are all front men for a sort of shadow, invisible state.
For the oligarchs. Yeah.
So my question there is, do you think that since the U.S. basically just adopted this older British model of utilizing destabilization, divide and conquer, utilizing radical Islam, things like that, do you think that older model is, I know I sort of skipped ahead, but you answered the next couple of questions. Do you think that older model of British strategy is it becoming outdated, or do you think that the populace is so dumbed down that it will always continue to work and the strategy of tension will never grow old?
I think it is. I mean, I don't know if it's certainly immoral, and it's certainly counterproductive. I mean, we can see that. I mean, British soldiers are being killed have been beheaded in the streets of London now. I mean, it's absolutely sickening. But it goes back a long way. You can look at the great game between Britain and Russia in the 19th century.
That's what I was getting at, right?
There was all the intrigue with the Persians and in Afghanistan and Central Asia. Britain, of course, aligned itself, and France as well. They aligned themselves with the Turks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really done again, by these oligarchic
to stop Russia, right?
Power groups, and to stop Russia. I mean, Russia was the great enemy, and really, Russia was also the great protector of Christians in the East.
Yeah.
And so it really was a betrayal of Christendom in a sense. I mean, it was a betrayal of those Christian peoples and Christendom in general, Christian civilization, Christian culture. So they'll keep doing it. I mean, they'll keep running these different Muslim extremist groups, or having client states,
mm-hmm.
the Saudis,
right?
Or the the U.S. obviously, they're acting in conflict right now with, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt to a large extent. I mean, that's what it looks like anyway. And they're, you got Libya, they overthrew Gaddafi using jihadists, and now they're trying to do the same thing to Assad, who, is the secular Alawite ruler of Syria, and he's also the protector of the Christians and allied with Russia. So they're clearly not stopping. It leads to chaos and savagery, but they don't seem to mind. So.
Interesting. Well, so on this geopolitical front, do you think that I know I didn't ask this in the list of questions that I sent, but it's just occurred to me.
Sure.
Having formerly been Catholic and then converting to Orthodox Christianity, how now do you see the Vatican in all this sort of this geopolitical game in relation to especially the stuff that we're talking? Do you see the Vatican as sort of like a client of the Anglo-American establishment now, or do you see it as its own sort of entity, or how do you view that now?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. That's a good question. I think it's divided, and to a large extent, and I think you can see that with the like the VatiLeaks scandal.
Right.
There are different subgroups within the Vatican, who are kind of struggling against each other for influence, and setting both international ties and church policy in general, probably. We can hope for the best, that the new Pope Francis, that he's a good guy, that he's got his heart in the right place. You also wonder about, he mentioned the other day, that it was supposed to be. I don't think this remark was supposed to be recorded or anything, but journalists caught it. He's speaking in private. Someone said he was speaking to a group of, I can't remember if it was students, but he said anyway that there was a homosexual lobby.
Yeah, sure.
Within the Vatican, that it was a problem, and it's like, well, yeah, there are these within the Vatican, the Vatican. I guess you could say the Vatican itself is not monolithic. You got people who are,
sure.
Who have, who are supportive of tradition and see the damage that is being done by, kind of these international forces of secularism, and you could go to even darker levels.
Right. Right.
They're also then you also have sympathizers with who people who want to and that's kind of what who want to bring in more international controls, and that's what you see with the VatiLeaks and the struggle over the Vatican Bank. There's just a lot of shady stuff that's
right.
Been going on with the Vatican Bank. You have the Rothschilds tied in there. That's a tough one. The fact that the Vatican is not only a church, but it's also a state.
Exactly.
That's just So of course it's been that way for centuries upon centuries. So that always adds these other levels of intrigue and
you're right.
Political games that go on around the Vatican and other powers.
Well, that raises another question. Something that when I was writing my thesis on Ian Fleming, I got really interested in the Cold War. And you being a Russia specialist, I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge in this area. What do you think about the sort of, say, within the last 100 years, the issue of Soviets or communists and the intrigues with the Vatican? Do you think that there's evidence for sort of Soviet infiltration of the Vatican and things like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there definitely was. Yeah, there certainly there, in fact, I mean, if you, there have been books written on this guy.
Right.
His name was Joseph Grigorievich, Grigulevich.
Mm-hmm.
And Grigorievich was a Karaim, which is a Turkic tribe, but they were in Lithuania. And he was a Lithuanian Jew, a Karaim Jew, who was a Soviet NKVD officer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an illegal, which meant he was deep cover, and what illegals do, and Russian intelligence still does this today. But they would assume the identity of citizens of foreign countries and operate within those countries or in third countries.
Sure.
And so Grigorievich was an illegal at the Vatican. He was posing as a Costa Rican citizen in Italy, and he, by the connections he made and the friends he made and the circles he ran in, this was in the late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
He actually became late 40s, early 50s. He actually became the Costa Rican ambassador to the Vatican, to Italy and the Vatican. So yes, yeah, the Soviets. I mean, and that's just one case.
That's just one, right? One among many, yeah.
Yeah, one among many. They had their agent networks in the Vatican. I mean, it was a two-way street. The Vatican, conducted a lot of secret diplomacy with the Soviet Union, especially right after the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right, and particularly after Pius XII, with John the 23rd, the Soviet Union began to be recognized. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that who was it? Was it which pope was it? John the Sixth, who was in office for 33 days, and he died.
It was it's John Paul I, and he held a special meeting. He held a special meeting with Patriarch Nicodem, who was
Nicodem,
right.
Nicodem, died from poison tea.
Exactly.
And, and he died, along with. I mean, that's so. Yeah, there's a lot of dark stuff there. It's kind of a hall of mirrors.
Right. It is.
As far as where you go, piecing it all together. It's I mean, all that stuff. The espionage stuff is certainly fascinating.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. The Russians really. I mean, they've always been the best at human intelligence. So
right.
They know what they're doing. So.
Well, that brings me to an interesting question. You mentioned in one of your articles about Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and you were talking about I believe it was the New York Times that wrote an article when it came out that he was involved in what they called, quote, eyes wide shut type, parties and orgies. What do you think? I don't know if you got a chance to read my analysis of Eyes Wide Shut and what I.
Yeah, that analysis was very good. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks.
I liked it a lot.
I was basically making the argument that it was kind of a sort of a throwing it in your face revelation of the method intended on sort of initiating the viewer into sort of the what we might call the occult worldview, or what you call the. You mentioned the Pleasure Dome police state, and you mentioned the Super Bowl Babylon, which I thought are great terms. Do you see a connection between? Do you see a connection between sort of the message of Eyes Wide Shut and what you call the Pleasure Dome police state and Super Bowl Babylon?
Yeah, there is a connection there, and what it stems from is an inversion of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That basically that an inverted hierarchy will promote, practice inverted values. So in the case of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, you had him, of course. You've had articles about after he was accused of rape, which was probably a setup, but
Right.
that happened in New York, I think, a year or two ago. But he was also exposed as having, been, this, enthusiastic attendee of orgies, but not just any ordinary orgies. They were very high class, and it was even reported on in the New York Times. That he would attend these weird parties, with, there would be costumes and, all these, fancy prostitutes and, it sounded kind of ritualistic in
Sure.
some ways. And it even mentioned in the New York Times article that, they all knew each other from being Masons. Oh, gee, that's strange.
So what?
It's in your face, it's that they can do whatever they want.
So what is the Pleasure Dome police state?
The Pleasure Dome police state is basically what this class, this oligarchic class, has constructed, and that is, by proclaiming, liberty and equality to everyone, it really, this institution of pluralism ultimately generates chaos.
Right.
And from there, it leads to tyranny. You create a police state by this dissonance, by this, importing, peoples from all around the world, who are not culturally compatible, and that's not even to, that's not insulting other cultures. That's just recognizing
reality.
There's dignity in difference, and we're all different, but it's not always a good idea to just throw everyone to speak together. It's not a good idea. Throw everyone together into big Babylonian blender.
Right.
It's like every culture has its dignity. Every people was meant to glorify God in its own way.
Yeah.
But that's what the establishment today denies. They say, oh no, we're all equal and we're all gonna, it's just this enormous chaotic free for all, where everything is atomized to the individual level, and the individual is, essentially the slave of his passions. So of course it's gonna generate chaos, and more crime, and or not only, just psychologically, kind of this sickness, this people being totally subjugated to their own desires, and that's how they're manipulated. Whether that's by TV, or being a slave to debt, or getting arrested for committing crimes, or
Yeah.
So all that so-called freedom, leaves this lower notion of freedom. No, it's not the higher notion of freedom. It's not freedom in God. It's not what we're supposed to aspire to. It's just just do whatever. Do whatever you can do whatever you want. Or you can be whoever you want. Do whatever you want. It's the individual is a blank slate. But this leads to tyranny.
Yes.
And you see it. You see. You can see whether it's the drones or the police helicopters.
Right.
It's everywhere. The electronic surveillance. It's really interesting that isn't it interesting that the most supposedly the most free country, that the self-proclaimed, the home of liberty and equality, has constructed, with these new NSA revelations coming out. It's interesting that, that the United States, supposedly the most free nation ever, that's what it's, it has built the most comprehensive, wall-to-wall surveillance grid in history.
Right. No, it's funny. It's actually the like what you talked about, the sort of opposite sides of the coin in terms of dialectics. We've actually swung. We were. We've actually swung to the opposite in the pendulum swing to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's what, I mean, it's like Dostoevsky said, that, or through his theorist of revolution, Shugajov, in the book Demons, I start with, I begin on a premise of liberty, and I end in, total destiny.
Yes.
And that really is what takes place. That's the dialectic of liberation. Because, I mean, man isn't, he's not actually liberated. He's just fulfilling, he's achieving self-will, So,
yeah.
We're not free, we're not finding true freedom in God or, in an acknowledgement of our limits, as mortal beings. Rather, we're seeking essentially to become, God-like, without any, like we're, like every man is a law unto himself.
Right.
It's essentially, it's kind of, it's Luciferian, I mean, it's weird stuff. But that the Pleasure Dome police state is the, you can look at it and say, well, it's kind of like a combination of, I mean, everyone right now is reading 1984.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the big news is the NSA surveillance. So everyone's reading 1984. Oh gosh, you got to get, got to bone up on that. Well, that's only half of it. The other half is the Pleasure Dome.
Yes, right.
That's so people got to read Brave New World too.
Right.
That's the other. It works together.
Well, here's something that I always mention that, and of course, when George Lucas made THX 1138, it was obviously ripped off of both 1984 and Brave New World. Maybe not necessarily in a rip-off, but it was an homage to it. But one thing I really like about that film is that he included an element that most of the, other sci-fi stories, especially from, 50, 60 years ago, that they didn't envision. I mean, I guess Asimov kind of envisioned it, but he, of course, presents it as a big utopia in a sense. But in regards to the idea of creating this sort of central supercomputer that's going to run every city, and we're going to have a smart city, and it's going to be so rational, I see that all as sort of the culmination of this, when Guénon talks about the
reign of quantity.
Right, or the reign of quantity sort of leads to this idea that, we can then construct this sort of big golem creature that will
Exactly. It's alchemy. I mean, this is
right.
And that's what's so interesting is, behind this, supposedly, cold, like this rationalism that, just, cold materialism.
Well, but it's all supposed to be.
Reality has an occult underside.
It's all supposed to be freeing, right? I mean, the Enlightenment, liberalism, and worship of the goddess reason was supposed to be about freedom and liberty. But what it's actually produced is, again, this idea that, all of this leads to the conclusion that we can make this big robot that's going to run everything, and then all the cities will be smart cities, which means that everything will be tracked and traced and recorded, literally everything. And you'll even have pre-crime, I posted the CEO of IBM doing a lecture about how it's going to be great when there's smart cities that have pre-crime that can judge on the basis of your psychological dispositions and past history, the fact that, you're going to actually commit this crime tomorrow, so we're going to have to, either kill you or arrest you or whatever. So I guess the point being, do you see and the reason I brought up THX 1138 was that's the irony there is that everybody who works in the big underground robot city, their only job is to build the robots that that enslave them.
It's total enslavement. It's interesting that you mentioned reason. We talked about reason earlier about how it kind of collapsed in on itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Hume, and it's like empiricism. It just leads to this total subject. Just subjective view. Nothing can be well, I don't care. There's, maybe there is, it doesn't matter. Essentially, but reason, So reason has collapsed itself, but they still put it forward, and I don't know. I thought this was interesting. Like when back in the French Revolution in 1793, you had Wolverine.
Right.
Across, the revolutionaries invaded these churches across the country and, took them over and had this, festival of reason.
Right.
A new pagan holiday. And at Notre Dame, at the Notre Dame Cathedral, interestingly enough, they would have these women who would be the goddess of the reason.
Right. Whores.
But I think it was either Notre Dame or it was in another. But
well, they put whores on the altar, and they were
they changed it. They did up the altar, and and they put exactly.
And the whore was supposed to be reason, right?
Yeah, reason was a prostitute, and that makes your reason without reason not subjugated to something higher, higher reality, faith and revelation and God.
Right.
Reason is a whore to desire.
Yes.
So, and what's that desire? It's that libido dominandi. That will to dominate. So you see that in the construction of this giant control grid. The golem or the robot. This desire to be a god. To essentially rule everything. And it just spins out of control and leads towards to total enslavement.
Yeah, that's the thing. The utopia that is presented is never what actually is given. What actually emerges is a sort of symbiotic parasitical system, like in THX 1138 or like the Matrix, where you're actually all of your energy and creativity in life is the battery for this big sort of monstrosity that enslaves you.
And Ganon, actually mentioned the same thing, about how men, it was first, you could go back to Descartes, but, men, create machines, and then they start conceiving of the world and the universe in this mechanistic fashion.
Yes, right.
And they start running, instead of using the machine, they start out using the machines for their convenience, but ultimately the machines, enslave them, and,
yes.
And man, becomes automated and, works according to the machine,
right,
rather than the other way around. Yeah.
So here's my question to you because I don't know your view in terms of like where we're headed in the next 20, 50, 100 years, or what your eschatological views are. But what's your prediction? Where do you see the world, this country go in the next 20, 50 years?
That of course, that's anyone's guess, but I would say it's even with these. It's tending towards dissolution and collapse. We can see signs of that in our culture all around us.
Right.
It's very sad. But we are witnessing the dissolution of the West.
Right.
What identity do people have today? It's just consumerism, right?
Right.
With the new religion of liberalism, what's its esoteric core? It's essentially Mammonism.
Right.
And so where does that leave you? People are, that just desolates the soul. So, the West is collapsing. It's attempting to kind of impose pathologies on the rest of the world.
Well, let me put it this way. Do you think that, given what is pretty much the standard narrative in the, quote, conspiracy genre. Do you think that the New World Order, quote unquote, that the oligarchical elite will succeed in, say, mass depopulation and a world government?
God, I hope not. They'll probably try. It's their agenda for depopulation and for, these are written up in official documents.
Right.
You have the, people like the Good Club, with Bill Gates and Oprah talking about it.
Right.
Buffett, or of course, Henry Kissinger and his national security memoranda.
Sure.
From the 1970s, but and Kissinger, of course, was working for the Rockefellers. So,
right. Sure.
Yes, they're going to try. We'll see what happens. Something, it's like you do. I don't know. We were, I want to be. You don't want to have like this false positivity, but it's like, well, you do what you can.
Right.
You give it to God, and
yeah.
And you struggle. You fight the good fight. That's what you can do.
Right.
So, they're clearly, right now they're going. It's like they're moving towards military action.
Right.
And Syria, it looks like, they want to go after Iran. Ultimately Russia. That's their ultimate target. So, I hope that, Russia can, prevent that and work to restore at the same time its culture and Orthodox Christianity and, kind of be a beacon, to the West. That's my personal hope, right? That we in the West, and all this is predicated on repentance,
Right. Well,
without repentance,
well, here's something I've sort of speculated on and theorized about. I wonder if the establishment hasn't already sort of factored into itself the idea that, well, when we look at past regimes, past empires, so forth, why do they collapse? Well, they always collapse because of essentially human error, human frailty, human corruption, things like that.
right?
So I'm guessing. So in their mind, what might be a way to avoid the possibility of human error causing a collapse? And I think that the transhumanist and sort of smart city control grid based on, a big AI supercomputer, I think that the thinking is probably that, well, this is actually the next level of evolution. And since, if we can install a big AI computer grid, Skynet, that will basically, police the world, that will ensure the continuance of the system, and robots will then work on the robots and so forth. That way human error won't enter into the equation and bring about a collapse of the system. Because from my perspective, the reason that the main flaw of the New World Order, if you will, is that it's based on a faulty anthropology. It's basically an extension of, as you said, the Enlightenment idea, which I think was sort of summarized in Darwin, regardless of what one thinks of, Darwin's views about, microevolution or something like that. I think that it's a completely false worldview. And I think that it was constructed that way to ultimately be destructive. Point being, when you build an entire world order on something that's faulty, like social Darwinism, it's only going to collapse. And so, if that's the case, do you think that the thinking is that we can sort of transition to transhumanism? That's my question. Do you think that's their view, or do you think that it's something else?
Yeah, I think that is their view. I mean, it's what we call technological progress, and kind of merging with, I mean, their vision is, merging with machine,
right?
And of course, they want this artificial life extension, and so.
Well, I mean, the very idea that you could merge with a machine, I mean, has to be based on the assumption of materialism. I mean, that's just completely. I mean, how are you going? No, I mean, like Kurzweil and people like that talk about like downloading their soul into a computer. I mean, that's just so ridiculous, given the fact. I mean, that number one, I mean, if all matter is essentially just matter, right? There's no. I mean, once your thoughts are gone, once your body decays, I mean, what is there to down?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they're trying to figure out a way to download their consciousness. Yeah. I mean, Kurzweil works at Google.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's like these are not just. I mean, yeah, I think they're nuts, but they're not just. They're not just people standing on a street corner, like yelling at imaginary.
Right.
Animals, I mean, these are serious people, who seek, a means of, extending life indefinitely, or, downloading consciousness into computers, and, singularity, bringing computers to the, levels beyond human intelligence and, reasoning capability and so on. So, yeah, that is what they're seeking. I mean, it's again, it's a recipe for destruction. I think as you talked about the just the materialism of it all. At the same time, you do have kind of this underside of it. It's a cold notion of
right. That's yeah.
Yeah, creating the golem, creating matter. Kind of like you're a god. Fashioning.
Yes.
Your own.
Exactly.
Your own matter, that you came up with, and you animated, and so
yes.
Having this godlike power, yeah, I mean it's insane, and it's doomed to fail. The world looks weirder and weirder, and I mean it's not for us to expect, or it's not for us to say, when. On an eschatological timeline, when this stuff comes to a close, I mean, it's our job, it's our duty to endure, to struggle and to endure to one another. But it's super, super, weird, and like we have to stay human. That's one thing, and that's the great temptation. You have to stay human. You are mortal, but you're promised resurrection. If you believe in Christ, through him is salvation, not in some machine or in some artificial reality, or like this, supposedly living forever. I mean, which would be hellish in itself.
Well, it's also ironic, given how, I mean, as we've talked about, I mean, our whole system is basically a big constructed facade, a big fraud. I mean, I don't know why anybody.
Yeah.
Why I talked to an ex-girlfriend of mine not too long ago, and we got on this subject, and we haven't been together for 10 years or so, so I hadn't seen her, but she's actually moved on and is dating an MIT professor, and they're both now, hardcore materialists, and they're all into transhumanism and all this trendy stuff. But what I thought was so, well, I guess it's sad and amusing at the same time. But I mean, I don't know why she thinks she's going to get access to. I mean, even if there was some great life extension program or whatever, or some a robot body that you could wear or something, I don't know, a surrogate body. I mean, I don't know why they think they're going to get it. I mean, Ray Kurzweil is not going to share that with you. You know what I mean?
No, I know. Yeah, it's this notion of, it's Superman, I mean, Superman is not, it's becoming Superman. you know, these people have no desire to share it with you, or you know, the means to become a, you know, what they essentially a god. You know, I mean, they don't care about us, or you know, but I mean.
No, some trendy person in Nashville is not going to get some access to something like that. No, you're going to. I mean, it's like Alex Jones always talks about. You've been given all the vaccines that are going to kill you, and I mean, you're not part of that club. So, the idea of just so many people that support this, that if they just sort of choose to believe that, oh, okay, well, I think transhumanism is a good idea, and I'm going to be like, as if that sort of inducts you into the club. Well, that's not reality.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I know. It's not gonna help you. I mean, you know, it won't. I mean, you know, you feel good about, you know, being part of some silly, you know, attempt to, you know, extend your, you know, to, you know, this kind of this phony eternity, you know, this attempt at phony eternity.
Yeah.
You know,
well.
I mean, it's all a lot of, it's a lot of fakery.
Exactly. I mean, I don't mean to drone on. I know we're approaching the close here, but you know, it makes me think too about. I mean, if there were, say, eventually a big AI supercomputer run smart city, you know, everybody sort of has this pop belief based on movies and science fiction that the machines are going to become sentient. Well, I mean, from a philosophical standpoint, that's impossible, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, yeah, there can be advanced what we could call AI, but the machines are not going to develop souls. I mean, in other words, you have to have the assumption of some bizarre Darwinistic scheme that's ultimately based on the occult. You know, that life just sort of magically just sort of pops out of, you know, matter, prima materia gets, you know, churned, and then boom, consciousness just sort of like puff in a magic smoke emerges out of that, all of which is nonsense. But in the same way, I mean, the idea that that machines are going to and super city computer or smart city supercomputers are going to become sentient and sort of terrorize everyone. None of that is actually. In other words, it would be humans running the system that are tyrannical.
Yeah.
That have sort of fooled people into thinking, you know, that the drones are going to come alive and get us. I mean, in other words, I know that that's stupid, but it all sort of goes along with the mythology that is the facade for what is ultimately just another fraud. It's the Wizard of Oz. It's the man behind the curtain, is what I'm getting at.
Right. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Yeah. It really is a strange. I think, you know, with the entire going back to the entire notion of you know, the supercomputers and the, you know, predictive. You know, I mean, they are currently, you know, as we found out from, you know, the NSA leaks, you know, they're essentially developing ways, you know, to track,
right,
you know, behavior,
sure,
you know, en masse, and
right,
you know, in order to control people, you know, whether that's crowds or individuals, you know.
Right.
So yes, there's always, and it has a human author. I think ultimately, though, of course, you know, all this entire attempt, this entire Promethean,
yes,
you know, this Promethean quest, it does have a spiritual author. You know, I mean, it is, you know, man has, you know, been tempted to rebellion against God, essentially, and so, you know, it doesn't that, you know, if you know, if people go that way, well, it doesn't end well.
Right, but that's the thing. Like, what I'm getting at is, since this same establishment that is supporting and behind all of that is basically behind a million other frauds, I mean, just even from a common sense, rational perspective, right? I don't mean that in the Enlightenment. You know what I mean? Just from a common sense perspective, if some entity has constantly lied to me and told me all these other frauds and scams, why would I suddenly turn around and believe that, oh, but they have discovered the fountain of youth and robots are going to give us, I mean, it's just preposterous is what I'm getting at. That
these people are master scammers.
Exactly, that's what it is.
I mean, you're talking about one of the banksters here, and those are the folks who run society. So
yeah,
and going back to Disneyland, I mean, it is all. It's this world of illusion,
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought it was interesting. Just in closing, the thoughts on Disneyland, just because such a weird place. But
it is weird.
Therapy Rose kind of equated, contemporary, and he lived until 1982.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, so he grew up in the 40s and 50s, and he equated American, American realities, or kind of unrealities, in an unfortunate sense,
mm-hmm.
to Disneyland.
Right.
He talked about Disney, that everything's kind of, premised on fakery. And I don't know if you read any Baudrillard, but he said the same thing. That he was the French post-constructionist.
Right.
Said that Disney. I mean, it's one big simulacrum.
Yes, it is.
Copy
right.
Not an original. And
right.
He also pointed out that in '91, after the Gulf War ended, that Schwarzkopf had his victory parade at Disneyland. I mean, it's really stranger than that.
I actually didn't know that. I did not know that. But that's great.
Yeah. He had a Disney World in Florida. It's just so strange, I mean, you think of it, the Gulf War, which Baudrillard called a war, that didn't happen. It's like, kind of the CNN thing. It's all packaging. But Schwarzkopf had his parade at Disneyland. I mean, just imagine the comparison. You have like the victorious general, the Triumphator in Rome. Going
right.
with his face, his face painted red like Mars. And he's in his chariot. Riding down the center of the city.
Yeah.
And then you have Schwarzkopf, standing next to Mickey Mouse and Donald.
Well, it's only appropriate.
On a big parade float. A bunch of kids around. Everyone's cheering.
Yeah.
Just absolutely. It's just bizarre.
Have you seen Southland Tales, the Richard Kelly movie?
No.
You should watch that because I don't know if I'm a fan of his because he uses a lot of Jungian archetypes and stuff like that. So like in Donnie Darko, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But and in the movie The Box, he actually treats the issue of the shadow government. But what's interesting about Southland Tales is that it takes place a few years in the future, and it's basically the U.S. is sort of broken up, and this sort of shadowy pseudo right-wing entity that's the neocons have taken over, and they have a big surveillance state. So it's in a lot of ways it's very prophetic. But one of the funny parts of it is that there's actually a war that's going on at that time. It's World War III, and the news is running these constant live feeds of the war, and the war is sponsored by Pepsi and Hustler.
Oh yeah.
So I thought that was a really brilliant way to do it. But
no. I mean, Idiocracy was, of course,
exactly right.
That, it really, welcome to Costco. I love you.
Yeah. You should watch Southland Tales because it also has there's the neo-Marxists, and then there's like the fake right wing, and they're both run by sort of a shadowy elite. So it's good in that way.
Interesting. Yeah.
So,
I mean, that kind of hits it on the head. Yeah.
Before we go, what do you have any books that you would recommend that the audiences for Jay's analysis might like, or a book you're working on, or articles you're working on?
Let's see. Well, I do have some projects I'm working on. course, I'm writing an article right now on Syria, which I hope to get out by the end of the month, this June. Otherwise, I'm going to be putting up my own blog soon, and it's called, hopefully it'll be up next month. It's called Patria Celestis, Heavenly Fatherland. So Patria, then Patria, and then Celestis, Caelestis. And so that's going to have my writings there. And I'm hoping to get some other people, to write with me. So, I think it'd be cool if you wanted to.
Sure.
You'd be welcome to.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And I'm also going to be for future articles. And right now I'm looking at translating them. Some Lev Tikhomirov, he's a Russian monarchist, and he wrote a kind of a eulogy for Alexander III when he died in 1894. And it's very inspiring. This man as the bearer of an idea, as the carrier of kind of upholding notion of sacral authority, or as a servant of God.
Right.
So I'm gonna translate that eventually. So I try to get like an article out a month. As far as books to read, I would recommend one to you, Jay. This is on espionage, but it's what got me into Russia originally.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the KGB, and it's called The KGB, The Eyes of Russia. And I think it was published around 1980, but it's by this guy named Harry Rositsky, Rositke, and he was a former CIA, he was a CIA case officer, but he writes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good book. He writes a lot about, the KGB's recruitment, or, Russian intelligence recruitment methods and stuff, the trade craft and things like that. And of course, it's sort of dated. He's talking about like Soviet, Cold War era stuff.
Right.
But nonetheless, very good.
Well, yeah, I love the Cold War stuff.
Yeah.
So I thank you for the recommendation.
I read that one when I was 10, and I thought it was awesome. My dad got it for me at a used bookstore, and I thought it was really cool. Otherwise, for books, I always have a pile of books on my bed, but they're all in Russian right now. I'm trying to think of English books. I don't know if you get the chance, read, Seraphim Ruff's Nihilism. It's a great start.
Yeah, I've read his book on Augustine. I've read his book.
Okay, that's good.
I've read Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, and so
that's a good one.
Those are good, but I've not read his Nihilism book.
It's a great one. You'll like it. And, Dostoevsky.
Sure.
So, that's the basic stuff for now.
All right. Well, so where's the best place if somebody wants to read your stuff? Oh, actually, I'll just put a link up to your articles.
Yeah. Up. I have a couple of pages right now. There's my alt-right archive.
Right.
If you Google me, you should be able to find it. And then there's the new alt-right site, which has a couple of my newest articles as well. So, and once I get my website up, then
right,
I'll
have a link to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right. Well, Mark, I appreciate it. It was a great talk. Really, really in depth. Really enlightening. And maybe.
Thanks, Jay. No, it was great to talk with you.
Yeah, maybe in the future we'll do another one. Talk about some other issues.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
All right. Thanks.